Hello, and welcome back to another episode of the Western Canon Challenge, where we are reading the entirety of the Western Literary Canon out loud. Today we are continuing journal collection number 42. I believe we have about two parts of this left. I think I'll split it into. And we are not currently up to any specific date. He has gone on a very long tangent about uh, Webster and the slavery laws, and Webster sort of capitulating to the Southern pressure to help them and thereby keeping slavery going in the South. Emerson is as, I guess, irate would be the word, and I mean, well justified, but he is very upset. And if he can be irate, I think this would qualify as being irate. Although, if you were to read it, he just looks like he is simply disagreeing with somebody's point here. You never see any unhinged behavior. Although, like I said, seeing that someone he respected so much, like Webster, is essentially caving into the pressures of the southern states is a very sad state of affairs. And of course, it only is a prelude to what's to come in, well, about 9 years, the Civil War. So we see Emerson anticipating this, obviously, by many years. He is on the forefront of those advocating for the abolition of slavery. And with that said, I will go ahead and keep going. He is essentially midway through these thoughts about Webster, but I wanted to split this journal collection into three parts, so it would split evenly instead of having one part be 60 minutes and the other like 25 minutes. So I'm just sort of dividing them up into equal portions, or as close to that as I can get. So with that said, I'll go ahead and start reading. Suppose it is said to the President, "My dear sir, Thomas Melville is gone, Mr. Cabot is dead, Mr. Otis of the Hartford Convention is dead, Mr. Quincy is old, the turbulent Quincy Adams is at last still, and though there is an unlucky book of the old Adams printing about these times, yet North or South we don't hear of anybody who will not be peaceable. I think you may venture it. Ah, Mr. President, trust not the information. The gravid old universe is spawning on. The wombs conceive, and the breasts give suck to the thousands and millions of hairy babes formed, not in the image of your statute, but in the image of the universe. Unless you can suppress the English tongue in America, and hinder boys from declaiming Webster's Plymouth speech, and pass a law against liberties, all is futile. Then, sir, there is England itself, faults of her own undoubtedly, but unhappily now so clean on this question that she will give publicity to every vice and trick of ours. There is France, there is Germany, but worst, 1,000 times worse than all, there is this yeaning America, the yeaning Northwest, millions of souls to accuse us. If the thing were to be carried in a close corporation, all the persons might be sounded and secured. Even in a state, even in a house, they can calculate the exact amount of resistance. But this is quite impossible in a country. For one, only one truth-seeker will ruin them. What is the use of logic and legal acumen if it be not to demonstrate to the people what is metaphysically true? The fact that a criminal statute is illegal is admitted by lawyers, and the fact once admitted by the people, the whole structure of this new tyranny falls to the ground. Why do not the lawyers, who are professionally its interpreters, put this home to the people? There is for every man a statement possible of that truth which he is most unwilling to receive, a statement possible, so pungent and so ample that he cannot get away from it, but must either bend to it or die of it. Else there would be no such word as eloquence, which means this. Mr. Webster did that thing in his better days for Hayne. Mr. Hayne could not hide from himself that something had been shown him and shown the whole world which he did not wish to see. He left public life and retired, and, it is said, died of it. Mr. Webster has now in his turn chosen evil for good, less innocently than Mr. Hayne, and Mr. Hayne is avenged. for it is certain that he will be cast and ruined. He fights with an adversary not subject to casualties. But Aristotle's reply to the question, what advantage a man may gain by lying, is still true. Quote, not to be believed when he speaks the truth, much more, not to be believed when he lies again. Webster and Choate thinks to discredit the higher law by personalities. They insinuate much about transcendentalists and abstractionists and people of no weight. It is the cheap cant of lawyers and of merchants in a failing condition and of rogues. These classes usually defend an immorality by the practice of men of the world and talk of dreamers and enthusiasts. Every woman that has been debauched has been so by being made to believe that it is the mode, it is custom, and none but the priest and a few devout visionaries ever think otherwise. People never bring their history into politics, or this thin smoke would deceive nobody. It is the most impolitic of all steps, this demoralization of the people. Quote, poets are the guardians of reverence in the hearts of the people. It must always happen that the guiding counsels of ages and nations should come not from statesmen or political leaders, always men of seared consciences, half villains, who it has been said are more dangerous than the whole ones. Mr. Webster would be very sorry if this country should take his present counsel for any but this particular emergency. But from contemplative men aloof by taste and necessity from these doubtful activities, and really aware of the truth long before the contemporary statesman, because more impressionable. Mr. Webster never opened a jury case without praising the law-abiding disposition of the people. Mr. Everett, a man supposed aware of his own meaning, advises pathetically a reverence for the Union. Yes, but he hides the other horn under his velvet. Does he mean that we shall lay hands on a man who has escaped from slavery to the soil of Massachusetts, and so has done more for freedom than 10,000 orations, and tie him up and call in the marshal and say, I am an orator for freedom. A great many fine sentences have I turned. None has turned finer except Mr. Webster, in favor of plebeian strength against aristocracy, and as my last and finest sentence of all, to show the young men of the land who have bought my book and clapped my sentences and copied them in their memory, how much I mean by them. Mr. Marshal, here is a black man of my own age, and who does not know a great deal of Demosthenes, but who means what he says, whom he will now handcuff and commit to the custody of this very worthy gentleman who has come on from Georgia in search of him. I have no doubt he has much to say to him that is interesting, as the way is long. I don't care if I give them, here are copies of my Concord and Lexington and Plymouth and Bunker Hill addresses to beguile their journey from Boston to the plantation whipping post. Does Mr. Everett really mean this? That he and I shall do this? Mr. Everett understands English as few men do who speak it. Does he mean this? Union is a delectable thing, and so is wealth, and so is life, but they may all cost too much, if they cost honor. It is very remarkable how rare a bad law and a moral law is. Does Mr. Everett know how few examples in civil history there are of bad laws? I do not think it will be easy to parallel the crime of Mr. Webster's law. That the crime of kidnapping is on a footing with the crimes of murder and of incest. How can Mr. Everett put at naught all manly qualities, all his claims to truth and sincerity, for the sake of backing up this cowardly nonsense? Does he mean this, that he and I shall do this? Or does he secretly know that he will die in the death sooner than lift a finger in the matter, he or his son's son, and only hopes to persuade certain truckmen and constables to do this, that rich men may enjoy their estates in more security? The historian tells that Thrasymachus' sophistry was political, and his aim the destruction of freedom by extinguishing that sense of justice on which it must ever be based. J. A. St. John, page 258. Mr. Webster is fond of fame. His taste is likely to be gratified, For there is not a man of thought or ingenuity but at every dinner table and every private letter and every newspaper I take up is forced to say something biting of this enemy of the honor of Massachusetts. He has the curse of all this country which he has afflicted. One way certainly the nemesis is seen. Here is a measure of pacification and union. What is its effect? That it has made one subject, one only subject for conversation and painful thought throughout the Union, slavery. We eat it, we drink it, we breathe it, we trade, we study, we wear it. We are all poisoned with it, and after the fortnight the symptoms appear purulent, making frenzy in the head and rabidness. What a moment was lost when Judge Shaw declined to affirm the unconstitutionality of the fugitive slave law. The present crisis is not analogous to the Revolution. No liberty of the controlling classes is now threatened. If the South, or if the federal government threatened the liberty of any class, I doubt not there would be as violent reaction as was then. This is merely a case of conscience, not of anger, a call for compassion, a call for mercy. That is one thing. Now it is not less imperative that this nation should say, "This slavery shall not be. It poisons and depraves everything it touches." There can never be peace whilst this devilish seed of war is in our soil. Root it out, burn it up, pay for the damage, and let us have done with it. It cost 100 millions. Twice so much were it cheap for it. Boston is a little city, and yet is worth nearly 200 millions. Boston itself would pay a large fraction of the sum to be clean of it. I would pay a little of my estate with joy, for this calamity darkens my days. It is a local, accidental distemper, and the vast interest of a continent cannot be sacrificed for it. Hosmer says, quote, "Sims come on a good errand, for summer is elected. Rontoul and Palfrey are likely to be. The state of Massachusetts ought to buy that fellow." End quote. I find it has made every student a student of law. The destiny of America, the Union, yes, great things dear to the heart and imagination, and not to be put at risk by every young ranter. But a large state, a prior Union, still dearer to heart and imagination, and much longer to be our country, is the world. We will not levy war against that to please this New Hampshire strapper nor the Carolinas. We will buy the slaves at 100 millions. It will be cheaper than any of our wars. It will be cheap at the cost of a national debt like England's. But we must put out this poison, this conflagration, this raging fever of slavery out of the Constitution. If Webster had known a true and generous policy, this would have made him. He is a spent ball. It is the combined wealth behind him that makes him of any avail, and that is as bad as Europe. The doctrine of Manilius is that the earth is at rest, pressed on all sides by equal forces, yet his language is remarkably coincident with the Newtonian theory of gravitation. The quotation is in Latin, however there's a footnote which I will read. The editors hazard this translation of an obscure passage. "And lowest of all, earth holds a middle station, and therefore remains at rest, because the whole universe draws back equally from this place, and by its falling causes that it shall not fall abroad. Midmost it is lowest, and the smitten bodies hold together from the blows which struck them." End of footnote. Then there is a quotation from Napoleon, and this is untranslated. History of Liberty. "'Tis idle to complain of abolitionist and free soiler, seesaw up and down, tilts the pole, swings the pendulum of the world. Violence is followed by collapse, cruelty by pity. You cannot get rid of women, you cannot cut the heart out and leave the life in. The atrocities of savages exasperated Christianity into being and power. Christianity lived by love of the people. Quote, "A nation never falls until the citadel of its moral being has been betrayed and become untenable." End quote. Kemble. Elizabeth Hoare finds the life of Campbell to send her back with new force of attachment to her temperance friends in America. Every life of a European artist shows her that they have no self-command. Their tears are maudlin, for they are the tears of wine, but the ocean and the elements are at the back of the brave old Puritans of the world. May. Lecturing. Experimentum in corpore vili. Cobden and Phillips learned their art at the expense of many a poor village lyceum and country church. Here follows a poem entitled House of Fame. Hearest thou not the great swow? Yes, Purdy, quoth I, and well enow. And what sound is it like? Quoth he. Like the beating of the sea, quoth I, against the rocks hollow, when the tempests do their ships swallow. And that a man stand out of doubt, a mile thence, and hear it rout. Chaucer. George Minot thinks that it is of no use ballading, for it will not stay, but what you do with a gun will stay so. The old guide knows the passes from mountain to mountain, the bridges over gorge and torrent, and the salvation of numberless lives in his oaken staff. And my guide knew not less the difficult roads of thought, the infinitely cunning transitions from law to law in metaphysics. In the most hopeless mazes he could find a cheerful road, leading upward and lighted as by the midday sun. A topic of the conduct of life under the head of prudence should be how to live with unfit companions, for with such life is for the most part spent. When R don't care for Julius, suddenly Julius comes round and cares for R, and shows the involuntary revelation which character makes of itself. I think all solid values run directly into manners. This floor holds us up by a fight with agencies that go to pull us down. Again balanced antagonisms. I like much in Allingham's poetry, but you must not remember the masters. Chaucer, Milton, Shakespeare have seen mountains if they speak of them. Young writers seem to have seen pictures of mountains. The wish to write poetry they have, instead of the poetic fury, and what they write is studies, sketches, fantasies, and not yet the inestimable poem. The vein is too poor to be worth working. It affords specimens, but not ingots. It is therefore a mere luxury. Their work, amateur poetry. But whenever I meet true poetry, and though it appear only in a single mind, I shall sit down to it as the result and justification of the age, and think very little of histories and statutes. Prudence. One of the cardinal rules is timeliness. My neighbor, the carriage maker, all summer is making sleighs, and all winter is making light, gay gigs and chariots for June and August. And so on the first days of the new season is ready with his carriage, which is itself an invitation. And the putting the letter into the post 1 minute before the mail bag is closed is a great triumph over fate. And in all our affairs, the sense of being ready and up with the hour imparts to a man's countenance and demeanor a wonderful air of leisure and success. A man who is always behind time is careworn and painful. Then there's a short quotation about prudence in French, which is untranslated. Where is nature? Where shall we go to study her interior aspects? She is hard to find. The botanist, after completing his herbarium, remains a dry doctor, no poet. The lumberer in Maine woods by Moosehead Lake does not get into the forest to any purpose, though he drives logs with his feet in the water all day. The poet goes untimely into a dozen inviting dells, and finds himself not yet admitted, but a poor, excluded dilettante. He makes many desperate attempts to throw the brush at the picture, but rarely makes a good hit. Ah, when, how rarely can he draw a true Aeolian note from the harp. And then comes some fine young gentleman like Milton or Goethe, who draws on his good London boots, and in coat of newest tailoring, with gold-headed cane, marches forth into the groves and straight, as if he were going to his club, to the secret sacred dale, where then all the muses and the shyest gods, fauns and naiads have their home. So also did Collins, and so did Spencer. Nay, Walter Scott himself, Sheriff of Selkirkshire, is admitted in full suit to the crag and burn. My texts are, moonlight caves when all the fowls are safely housed as bats and owls, etc. Mountains on whose barren breast, etc. Bubbling runnels joined the sound. Shakespeare's Threenies. The railroad and telegraph are great Unionists. Frank Brown told me that whilst he was at Savannah, they were telegraphing to the President at Washington every hour news of the Cuban invaders. Treat drastically. The scholar goes to the attorney's office or the carpenter's shop and, however civilly, is treated as a trifler. Here is real business, and he is soon set aside. But Archimedes and Kant are as much realists as blacksmiths are, and they are to deal with intellections as rigorously and drastically as the joiner with his chisel and board, and set carpenter and merchant aside. I do not forgive any one for not knowing and standing by his own order. Here are clergymen and scholars voting with the world, the flesh, and the devil against Sumner and freedom. New genius always flees too old. The new John the Baptist. It is not to be disguised that all our contemporaries, scholars as well as merchants, feel the great despair, are mere Whigs, and believe in nothing. Repent ye, for the kingdom of heaven is at hand. Lecturing. Danger of doing something. You write a discourse, and for the next weeks and months you are carted about the country at the tail of that discourse simply to read it over and over. In feeble individuals, the sex and the digestion are all. Dualism. I see but one key to the mysteries of human condition, but one solution to the old knots of fate, freedom, and foreknowledge, the propounding, namely, of the double consciousness. Excellent tests of the artist's life in Vasari's Life of Fra Angelico, Giovanni de Ficiol. He said, quote, "He who practiced the art of painting had need of quiet, and should live without cares or anxious thoughts." Quote, "He altered nothing of a painting once finished, but left all as it was done the first time, believing, he said, that such was the will of God," like Jones Very. Quote, "He would never take a pencil in hand until he had first offered a prayer." Votes in Concord. For Palfrey, 169, Thompson, 101, Frothingham, 28. Imbecility of the good party. Speak very modestly of the country and of its virtue. Any action of the well-disposed and intelligent class in its affairs is uniformly reckoned an impertinence, and they are presently whipped back into their libraries and churches and Sunday schools. There is one benefit derived from the movement lately. The most polite and decorous Whigs, all for church and college and charity, have shown their teeth unmistakably. We shall not be deceived again. We believed, and they half believed, that they were honest men. They have been forced to take prematurely their true and ignominious place. I find a text for our very fact in an English paper speaking of their April 10th, 1848. Quote, "It precipitated the Whigs into Toryism, making them rush into that political infamy for which they seem to have a constitutional predilection." Leader, May 3rd, 1851. Our people mean that men of thought shall be dilettanti, ornamental merely. If they dare to be practical with their ideas of beauty, it is on their peril. Everett is ornamental with liberty and dying Demosthenes, etc. But when he acts, he comes with the planter's whip in his buttonhole, and Eliot writes History of Liberty and votes for South Carolina, and at University, Mr. Sparks and Mr. Felton carry Demosthenes and General Washington clean for slavery. The Boston letter to Webster was a shop-till letter, and the Union party is a shop-till party. I like that Sumner and Mann and Palfrey should not be scrupulous and stand on their dignity, but should go to the stump. They should not be above their business. The young minister did very well, but one day he married a wife, and after that he noticed that, though he planted corn never so often, it was sure to come up tulips, contrary to all the laws of botany. Every god is still there sitting in his sphere. The young mortal comes in, and on the instant and incessantly fall snowstorms of illusions. It will hereafter be noted that the events of culture in the 19th century were the new importance of the genius of Dante, Michelangelo, and Raphael to Americans, the reading of Shakespeare, and above all the reading of Goethe. Goethe was the cow from which all their milk was drawn. They all took the quote-unquote European complaint and went to Italy. Then there was an uprise of natural history, and in London, if you would see the fashionable and literary celebrities, you must go to the soirees of the Marquis of Northampton, President of the Royal Society, or to the Geological Club at Somerset House. It seems, however, as if all the young gentlemen and gentlewomen of America spent several years in lying on the grass and watching, quote, the grand movements of the clouds in the summer sky, during this century. Politics. Bear in mind the difference between the opponents and the defenders of the shameful state, that the opposition will never end, will never relax whilst the statute exists. As long as grass grows, as long as there is summer and winter, night and day, world and man, so long the sentiments will condemn this. But your statute in its advocacy is a thing, is a phantasm, is a contrivance, a cat's cradle, a petty trap, a jackstraw that has no root in the world. But we saw longevity in our cause. It can well afford to wait. For ages and worlds the stars of heaven and the thoughts of the mind are the editors and vote distributors of the free soil. Quote, there is no happiness in this life but in intellect and virtue. Wordsworth, Letter to Beaumont. Margaret Fuller. It fitted exactly, that shipwreck, thought Ellery to the life and genius of the person. 'Twas like Socrates' poison, or Christ's cross, or Shelley's death. For goodness is a sad business, said Ellery, and if he was insurer, he would never insure any life that had any infirmity of goodness in it. It is Goodwin who will catch pickerel. If you have any moral traits, you'll never get a bite. Berenger's answer to those who asked about the de before his name, and then the rest is in French. Aristocracy. Make yourself useful. That is the secret to clear your complexion and make you desired. The 4 degrees of lordship. 1. Protection. 2. Hospitality. 3. Invention and art. 4. Moral aid. Webster truly represents the American people just as they are, with their vast material interests, materialized intellect, and low morals. Heretofore their great men who have led them have been better than they, as Washington, Hamilton, and Madison. But Webster's absence of moral faculty is degrading to the country. Of this fatal defect, of course, Webster himself has no perception. Why should we who believe in the intellect ever speak or lecture to a public meeting without yielding them a spark of lightning, some word of transforming, upbuilding truth? Politics. In this age of tools, one of the best machines is certainly this governing machine which we have brought to such mechanical perfection, the distributing political electricity over a vast area, so as to make the highest energy consistent with perfect safety. Thus yesterday was election day, and a revolution, for every election is a revolution, went off with the quietness of a picnic or a sermon. This by means of universal suffrage and town meetings and ward meetings. I believe so much in metamorphosis that I think the man will find the type not only in kind but in quantity of all his moral and mental properties in the great world without. He is to hold to his purposes with the tough impracticability of gravitation itself. Margaret had the attributes of a lady, a courtesy so real and sincere that it reached the chambermaid, the mantua maker, and all who served her for money. The use made of fate in society is babyish. Put your finger in your eye. It should rather be to bring up our conduct to the loftiness of nature. The Englishman and the Frenchman may have the November desolation, emptiness which cannot see a lamp-post or a dangling rope without temptation to suicide, but to a charged, healthful, preoccupied mind, night and storm and cold are not grim, but sternly cheerful even. Let him empty his breast of all that is superfluous and traditional, of all dependence on the accidental, on money, on false fame, falsehood of any kind, and speak wild truth, and by manners and actions, as unaffected as the weather, let him be instead of God to men, full of God, new and astonishing. I suppose I need not go to St. Louis to know the flavor of Southern life. There is not only St. Louis, but also Avernus and a fiery cigar. Goethe kept his Acherontian experiences in a separate bag, and said, if he himself should happen to fall into that bag, he should be consumed, bones and all. Heterogeneity, character. Men are miscellanies, rag bags, unealed glass, utter discontinuity, and all their power absorbed in their individual antagonisms. Quote, hot, cold, moist, and dry, four champions fierce, contend with a man. 'Tis Newton's heterogeneous body which loses the ray of light. Now if a fire, as for example love's, could kindle and melt them over, recast the whole mass, then you should have logic, unity, and power, a man that would be felt at the center of the Copernican system. I noticed a little boy in the company whose speech in talking with his mates never went out of a mendicant from him, engaging him to what was said, but he remained quiet entire when his speech was gone. So will it be when he is a man. Wealth. The world is babyish, and the use of wealth is, it is made a toy. Men of sense esteem wealth to be the assimilation of nature to themselves, the converting the sap and juices of the planet to the nutriment and incarnation of their design. Power is what they want, not candy, and they will pay any prices. Power for what? Power to execute their idea, which in any well-constituted man, of course, appears the end to which the universe exists, and all its resources might well be applied. Each of the elm trees that you see over the land sends its roots far and wide. Every great one to some river or watercourse, its roots will run a mile, and the education of each vascular man goes on well in proportion as his masculine roots draw from the natures around him their tribute. After all, Canova had seen, he was astonished at the Elgin marbles, and happy in finding them real flesh, nothing geometrical, nothing conventional, but a vera carne, and satisfied that he had always believed that the works which want this excellence are only copies from the great masters. Margaret Fuller's Journal. The best works are, and then there's looks like it's an Italian quotation here. But these swift flashings are from minds full of heaped up fuel well on fire, acted on by the muse, perfect births. Never was truer fable than the Sibyl's writing on leaves which the wind scatters. The excellence of fairies is to be small. The pride of England is to rule the world in the little plain chamber of St. Stephen's. In like manner, the whole battle of the world is fought in a few heads. A little finer order, a little larger angle of vision, commands centuries of facts and millions of stupid people. We shall not long go on reckoning prosperity by the census. The more fools you have, the worse, but by the competent heads. Is the thing really desirable? Then there is a way to it, in minimis natura. Vishnu in his avatar came as a dwarf, and asked for as much earth as he could cover with 3 steps. The evil power was duped and granted it, and the dwarf took in a world with each step. And the youth I heard last Sunday was a sort of rattle of thunderbolts behind there in the back of his head. He threatened in every sentence to say somewhat new, bright, fatal, and that is the charm of eloquence, its potency. Here is mere play, play of genius, improvisation for the artist's own delight, and out of the midst of it he hurls a winged word that becomes a proverb of the world, and conquers kings, and clothes nations in its colors. I like that Margaret Fuller should see in Napoleon's head his mighty future, and for all the beautiful, even voluptuous mouth, should find mountains of the slain and the snows of Russia not irrelevant. I read somewhere that Dalton did not wait for empirical confirmation of his quote-unquote law, but promulgated it, struck by its internal evidence. Probably Kepler's laws were so seen. Newton's was, and the transcendental anatomy stands so, the one animal, or the thoughts of God written out, and Knox's laws of races, that nature loves not hybrids and extinguishes them, that the colony detached from the race deteriorates to the crab. It would be a great comfort in metaphysics to establish a good collection of these instances of accepted ideas as a table of constants. Fate. There is a thick skull that is fate. The crustacea, the birds, the tortoises are fatalists, yet amelioration must be assumed. These very walls and jails must be believed to be charity and protection, and meanness the preparation of magnificence, as madness is assumed to be a screen of a too much tempted soul. In each town you visit there is some man who is in his brain and performance an explanation of all that meets the eye there. If you see him, all will become plain. Mr. Erastus Bigelow, Mr. McElrath, Mr. Lawrence, Mr. Crocker, Mr. Vanderbilt, the old Roch and Rodman, Jackson and Lowell, the Dwights at Springfield, Mr. Mills, Mr. Forbes, are each a walking city, and wherever you put them will build one. Also, I believe that nothing can be done except by inspiration. Editor's note: many pages of matter printed in Fate are here omitted. End note. People often talk most of that which they do not represent. Boston talks of union and fevers into pro-slavery, but the genius of Boston is seen in her real independence, productive power, and northern acuteness of mind. Here follow a couple Greek words here which are untranslated, which is generically anti-slavery. Boston Common, Boston Athenaeum, Lowell Institute, railroads, and the love of German literature, these are the true Boston, and not an accidental malignity or a momentary importance of a few pug noses. People too slight to sail in any but the fairest weather, and therefore by their very importance praising the great prosperity of Boston, quote, "If it were always such weather as this," my Captain Ellis used to say, quote, "women might take this ship to sea," I recall today in conversation with William H. Channing the impression made by Wilkinson. He seemed full of ability, power of labor, acute vision, marvelous power of illustration, of great learning in certain directions, having also the power I so value and so rarely meet of expansion, such as Alcott shines with, but all this spoiled by a certain levity. I should say of him that as we see children at school often expend a prodigality of memory and of arithmetical power, which occurring in an adult subject would make a Porson, Parr, or Lacroix, and see it in such children without respect, mere boarding school rattle, because it does not seem solid and enduring, or known to the mind itself, and so secured but merely as this year's grass or annual plants, which a single night in November will annihilate. So I believe that all this unrealized ability seemed insecure. As soon as he himself has said, quote, These weapons are mine, and lo, by them I possess the universe, as yonder astronomer does the stars by his tube and chart. O joy, I cannot live, I am too happy. Hold back thy thunderbolt, Jove. Envy me not my near approach. Then we should sympathize with the terror and beauty of his gifts, and he would be sacred to himself and to us. It did not seem that he was enamored of his thoughts, as all good thinkers ought to be. A fair ample house with excellent windows, but no fireplace. Edward Everett had in my youth an immense advantage in being the first American scholar who sat in the German universities and brought us home in his head their whole cultured method and results, to us who did not so much as know the names of Heine, Wolff, Hug, and Röntgen. He dealt out his treasures, too, with such admirable prudence, so temperate and abstemious, that our wonder and delight were still new. America, Emigration. In the distinctions of the genius of the American race, it is to be considered that it is not indiscriminate masses of Europe that are shipped hitherward, but the Atlantic is a sieve through which only or chiefly the liberal, adventurous, sensitive, America-loving part of each city, clan, family are brought. It is the light complexion, the blue eyes of Europe that come. The black eyes, the black drop, the Europe of Europe is left. Bias. I have said so often, and must say once more, that the first fortune is a controlling determination of genius that leaves Haughey no choice but to be mineralogist, Paxton no choice but to be landscape gardener and architect, and Jackson a chemist. That abolishes so many perplexities. But that is not enough. He must have adaptation, besides, to men, or else that magazine of sufficiency that makes him indifferent to other men, like a statue of a Roman emperor in a crowd. Prudence. I was to have quoted respecting money Lord Mansfield saying that the funds gave interest without principal, the land principal without interest, but mortgages both principal and interest. Mr. Eben Francis told me 20 years ago that it was easy to invest $1 million, but by no means so easy to invest the second million. And I heard the other day that with all his care of his property, and with all the high rates that money rents at in Boston, his property has not increased faster than 6% for many years past. This is the end of Part 2 of Emerson's Journal Collection number 42, dating from the year 1851, when the author was 48 years old. Thank you for listening.